The babysitter we trusted, who tried to replace me as mother. My name is. I remember the first night I met her, how the porch light haloed her silhouette against the wood, and my heart eased for the first time in months. I was exhausted, like every mother juggling bottles and work emails, the weight of responsibility pressing into my shoulders until they ached. When she smiled that soft, professional smile and said, "I'll take good care of him," my breath felt like it found space again. That week felt like a gift, really. She arrived with a gentle knock, her tote bag slung over one shoulder, and slid into our routine as if she belonged there forever. I watched her from the hallway, folding tiny onesies on the bed, her fingers tracing the seams, humming a lullaby I didn't recognize. My chest fluttered at the tenderness in her voice. It was such a relief, like a pause button had been pressed on my constant worry. A few days in, I started noticing the little things. She'd leave notes in my purse with phrases like, "You're doing great," and sometimes a lavender sachet tucked in between receipts. I'd reach in for a snack and find that sachet, and a weird calm would wash over me. My hands would slow their shaking, and I'd think, maybe I can just breathe today. But there were moments that tugged at the edges of my comfort. Like the time I peeked in on them through the half-open door and saw her nestled next to him in the crib, his tiny hand wrapped around her finger. My stomach twisted, and I pressed my palm to the doorframe, breath catching in my throat. I stepped back so fast I nearly tripped, and my heart pounded like a drum. And then there were the mornings when I'd find her sifting through his things, checking the thermometer and wiping off the nursery drawers as if she owned every corner of that room. My skin went cold, and I felt sweat bead at my hairline, even though the air was crisp. I'd step forward and say, "I'll handle that," my voice trembling like I'd swallowed a stone. When I first saw the photo, my blood ran cold. It was slipped under my door, her and him, smiling into the camera like a family portrait. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped it. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, a frantic drumbeat that pulsed up my arms. I slipped it into my pocket, heart hammering, and I wanted to rip the door off its hinges. I confronted her that night, voice catching in that tight way it does when you're terrified. "What is this?" I asked, lunging forward with the photo in my fist. She looked at it, then at me, with a calm acceptance that made my skin crawl. "I love him," she said, voice soft, like he needs someone who'll never leave. My jaw locked, and I could feel tears brimming, but I blinked them away, nodding too quickly. There was something in her eyes then, something possessive, like she saw him as hers by right. My hands were hot at my sides, fists clenched so tight my nails bit into my palms. I tried to pull my lip into words, but it was like my voice was buried under ice. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the living room in socks, heartbeat rattling in my ears. I kept picturing her bending over his crib, humming that lullaby that still echoed in my mind. Every shadow in the hallway felt alive, waiting. And me, I felt small, like I was shrinking under the sheer weight of everything she'd stolen. But I made a promise to myself as I stood in the dark, one hand on his crib, the other on my heart. I would not let her replace me. Not for a second. Because this was my home, my son, and nothing, and no one, would take that from me. Later that evening, I slipped into the living room after tucking him in, the floorboards whispering under my feet. The only light came from the street lamp outside, casting long, wavering stripes across the couch. My husband was already there, crouched over his laptop, jaw tight as he sorted through our home security alerts. I placed a trembling hand on his shoulder, and he looked up, exhaustion softening his gaze. "I saw her in the feed again," he said, voice low. My chest constricted. He pointed to a paused frame, her silhouette edging past the nursery door at dusk, one hand trailing along the wallpaper. It was the same hallway I walked every day, the same threshold I guarded. My palms went slick, and I felt a cold flash of anger and fear. We rewound the footage, watching her linger just long enough to press her palm against the doorframe. The camera caught her breath as a faint puff of mist, as if her presence chilled the air itself. My heart hammered so loudly I feared it would drown out everything else. My legs shook, but I forced myself to stay seated, to watch the proof unfold in pixelated light. When the clip ended, the silence was heavy. My husband closed the laptop and reached for my hand, thumbs rubbing circles into my knuckles. "We can't keep reacting," he said. "We need to plan." Anguish coiled in my gut. Planning meant admitting she wasn't gone. It meant drawing battle lines around our home. That night, we sat at the kitchen table surrounded by sketches of floor plans and lists of weak points, the back door lock that sometimes stuck, the low basement window, the live feed's blind spots. My fingers traced each line until they trembled. I thought of her notebook, how she'd documented every feeding time, every lullaby. Her precision had invaded our lives. Now, our task was to outmaneuver her. We took turns pacing, reading aloud potential strategies. "Motion sensors," I said, tracing a circle around the living room on our map. "An alarm that broadcasts to our phones." He nodded and added decoy cameras, in empty rooms, so she would expose herself wherever she crept. Each suggestion felt like armor snapping into place around a vulnerable heart. When the plans lay complete, we paused. The weight of what we'd created settled over us like a storm cloud. I rubbed my temples, tasting metal at the back of my throat. The house, our refuge, had turned into a fortress blueprint. We'd transformed fear into a strategy, but the toll showed in the dark rings under our eyes. Later, I wandered the hallway alone, hand trailing the wallpaper's subtle pattern, like a mother soothing a fussy child. My fingers paused at the nursery door. I pressed my palm flat against the wood and imagined her slender hand in that exact spot. My skin prickled, and I stepped back as though jolted by an unseen charge. I exhaled sharply and forced myself to lean in, closing my eyes against my rising panic. It felt like she was still there, waiting for me to flinch. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay in the dark, listening to my husband's even breathing, and counted ceiling shadows until dawn. Each passing hour felt like a challenge. Stay awake until I knew our defenses held. Every creak, every distant car horn rattled me. I envisioned her eyes, calm and certain, surveying our home, deciding which door to pick. At some point before sunrise, exhaustion claimed me. I dreamt I was cradling our son in the nursery, and the walls closed in around us until there was nowhere to run. I jolted awake, sweat matting my hair, and sat straight up, heart racing. My husband stirred beside me. "I checked the secondary feed," he said quietly. No movement. Relief sloshed through me, leaving my limbs heavy. I sank back, burying my face in the pillows, but my hands sought the blanket at my side. I clutched it until my knuckles ached, silent proof that we were still here, still fighting. When morning light edged through the curtains, I rose like a soldier after a long watch. The house was still and silent, but I moved with purpose, checking locks, testing sensors, reviewing the new camera angles on my phone. Each confirmation that our defenses worked felt like a small victory. Later that day, I carried our son to the living room and showed him the playpen that now sat beneath a camera he barely noticed. He kicked at a stuffed toy, oblivious to the wire concealed in the curtains. I kissed his forehead and whispered, "I've got you." My voice was steady, though I felt the echo of last night's fear in my chest. As he giggled, chasing a rolling ball, I exchanged a glance with my husband. No words were necessary. We had turned our fear into action, and our home into a place where laughter could survive even the darkest threats. For now, that was enough. That weekend, the kitchen smelled of burnt toast and stale coffee, a reminder that sleep had become a rare currency. I shuffled through the morning light that filtered through the curtains, my fingers brushing the counter's chipped edge as if seeking reassurance. Every surface felt charged, like the moments I'd left my son alone for just a second had widened into impossible chasms. My heart pounded against my ribs with that familiar tightening, fear laced with a surge of anger I couldn't shake. I spilled the last drop of coffee into my mug, grimacing at its bitter edge. My eyes flicked to the bulletin board where I'd pinned 2 pieces of proof, her reaching into our lives with every note and photo she'd left. I nodded to myself, steeling my resolve. It was time to face the evidence head-on. I retrieved the first proof, a glossy photograph slipped under my door in some desperate ritual. In the image, she knelt by the crib, one hand gently brushing my son's cheek while she leaned in close, as though breathing him in. His eyes were wide with wonder, his tiny hand resting on her forearm like he belonged there. I studied the grain of the photo, its glossy sheen reflecting the morning light, and a tremor crawled through my fingers. My jaw clenched, skin prickling at the betrayal captured in that frozen moment. I set the photo on the table and reached for the second proof, a crumpled note I found tucked inside his onesie drawer. The paper was stained with tears and coffee rings, each crease a testament to my late-night panic. The message was scrawled in looping script: "He needs someone who won't let him go." Those words stabbed through me. My chest tightened so hard I thought I'd stop breathing. I smoothed the note flat, fingertips tracing the ink as if trying to erase her claim. I settled onto the edge of the couch, proofs in hand, and let the weight of those objects pull me under. My shoulders shook as the anger rose in my throat, hot and corrosive. I remembered how I'd trembled when I first read that note, how my vision had blurred, and how I'd clutched my son so tight afterward that I left dents in his soft flesh. Guilt and rage tangled in my chest, guilt for not seeing it sooner, rage at the audacity she'd shown. My husband appeared in the doorway, eyes dark with concern. He crouched beside me and wrapped an arm around my shoulders. I pressed the proofs into his hand. "Look at this," I whispered, voice trembling. He opened his palm, paper crinkling under his thumb, and folded his brow. I could feel his pulse thudding through the palm of my hand as he studied them. "We can't ignore this," he said, voice low. My throat tightened but I nodded. The proofs felt like shards of glass, dangerous to hold but essential to keep. I wiped my cheek, surprised at the heat of my tears. "I know," I said, voice raw. I don't know how she thinks she can do this." He squeezed my hand and stood, guiding me into the hallway. We paused in front of the nursery door, the proofs heavy in my other hand. My breath caught as I pressed the photo against the wood, then the note just above it, like talismans warning intruders away. My fingers trembled against the smooth paint. I heard my own breathing echo in the hush. "She won't cross this line again," my husband promised, voice firm. His certainty offered a flicker of calm, but my nerves still buzzed like exposed wiring. I touched the door, feeling the slight vibration from the baby monitor inside. My chest loosened just enough to let a shudder pass through me. We backed away, leaving the proofs in place. I straightened, brushing imaginary dust from my jeans, and forced myself to meet his gaze. My heart still pounded, but beneath the tremor, a steely resolve settled in. We would use these proofs, not as weapons against each other, but as shields around our family. We would gather every piece of evidence, every whispered note and illicit photo, until there was nowhere left for her to hide. And in that moment, standing side by side in the hallway's half-light, I felt the first real spark of hope. We had the proof. Now we just had to wield it. The drip of rain against the window sounded like tapping fingertips on glass, pulling me from a restless doze. I sat up in bed, sheets twisted around my waist, and pressed my palm to the cool wood of the nightstand. My throat felt raw, as though I'd been screaming in my dreams. A low rumble of thunder rolled through the house, and I swallowed against the dryness in my mouth. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood barefoot on the hardwood floor. The hallway light cast a soft glow that danced across the walls. My heart rattled in my chest, each beat an echo of last night's confrontation. I wrapped my arms around myself, shoulders tight against a breeze that shouldn't have been there, and moved toward the nursery door. The scent of lavender greeted me like a fragile promise. Inside, our son lay restless, blankets kicked aside. I crouched beside the crib, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. His eyelids fluttered, and he murmured something unintelligible. My chest warmed with the ache of relief when he settled back into sleep. I ran a fingertip along the rail's smooth curve and felt the weight of every night spent guarding him. Behind me, footsteps approached. My husband appeared in the doorway, eyes rimmed with worry. He crouched beside me, hand warm against my back. "Did he cry?" he whispered. I shook my head, voice tight, just shifting. He inhaled, the sound soft in the hush. Together we watched our son's chest rise and fall until he breathed evenly again. We backed out, closing the door gently. In the hallway, the floor felt uneven beneath my feet, like the ground itself had shifted under the strain of fear. My muscles shook, tremors crawling through my calves and up into my torso. I pressed my forehead against the wall, tasting the faint tang of paint. My husband slipped an arm around my shoulders, and I clung to him, letting his solidity anchor me. In the living room, the glow of the laptop screen cut through the dark. The feed from the front entrance camera showed empty pavement slick with rain. I sat on the edge of the couch, leaning forward, eyes strained. Every shadow seemed to hide her, every raindrop on the lens a potential sign. My fingers drummed the armrest, each tap echoing my frantic thoughts. He joined me with 2 mugs of chamomile tea. Steam curled upward, and I inhaled the soothing scent before bringing the mug to my lips. The warmth slid down my throat, but it did little to soothe the tightness tightening at my ribs. My hands wrapped around the mug, knuckles pale above the handle. I watched his face in the monitor's reflection, his jaw clenched, brow furrowed. We hadn't slept in tandem for nights, but exhaustion had woven us closer. "Nothing's moved," he said, voice hushed. I nodded, though the word felt hollow. We'd fortified every door, plotted every route, but vigilance alone hadn't silenced her. My chest constricted at the thought of more plans, more layers of defense. I set the mug on the coffee table, its ceramic surface rattling under my hand. "The storm's helping mask sound," he added. "Maybe we should rest while we can." His suggestion was gentle, but my mind pinged with refusal. Rest felt like surrender. I traced the grain of the wood, fingertips raw from pacing. Memories of her silhouette in the hallway wallowed through me, calm, precise, certain she belonged. He studied me for a long moment, then closed the laptop's lid with a soft click. The room fell into deeper shadow. "I'm going to bed," he said quietly. "You should too." His words wrapped around me, soft and urgent. I stood slowly, legs stiff, and he guided me toward the stairs. Each step creaked beneath us, the sound harsh in the stillness. In our bedroom, I peeled the damp sheets from the bed and tugged them taut. The pillow felt cool and unfamiliar under my cheek. I lay on my back, arms stretched above my head, staring at the ceiling where faint cracks formed a spiderweb of worry. My husband climbed in beside me and drew me close, one arm slung across my ribs. His breath warmed my neck. I wanted to close my eyes and drift, to let exhaustion claim me, but the flash of her voice, soft and possessive, lingered in my mind. I tossed onto my side, back to him, as though I could shield him from the shadows that haunted me. My pulse hammered in my ear, and I could feel the mattress dip as he shifted, worry etched into his posture. Somewhere between wakefulness and surrender, I heard our son's quiet whimper carry through the monitor. Instantly, tension shot through me like electricity. I rolled onto my side, hand reaching for the bedside phone. My husband was up in a heartbeat, and together we moved as one toward the nursery. In the dawn's first light, we traded sleep-starved nods and soft promises of safety. I held our son close, his warmth seeping into my bones and chasing away some of the cold fear. My husband hovered at the doorway, eyes searching mine, and I found a flicker of hope there, a tacit vow that we would not let fear win. And in that fragile light, I realized that each creak and whisper of the house was a reminder, not just of threat, but of survival. We would rise with the storm, stand through the night, and greet every morning as a victory. The scent of cedar from the living room bookshelf drifted through the air as I sank onto the floor cushions. My limbs felt leaden with exhaustion, but my mind raced ahead of my body, replaying every shuffle of footsteps I'd heard in the hall. I rested my back against the couch, feeling the fabric press into my spine like a reminder that I wasn't alone. The hush settled around me, soft as a blanket, though my chest felt too tight to breathe freely. A hush fell as the wind chimes outside whispered in the dusk breeze. I pressed my fingertips to the edge of the coffee table, tracing its grain until I could taste the tension behind my teeth. My husband sat beside me, ribs brushing mine, offering a quiet solidarity. He passed me a glass of water, and I tipped it back, letting the cool clarity wash down my throat. For a moment I could feel relief glimmer, like a candle guttering in a dark room, and then the memory of her calm smile sent a tremor racing along my nerves. I tried to steady my breathing, inhaling through my nose as I felt the cool air fill my lungs, then exhaling like a soft sigh. "Do you think she'll try something new tonight?" I whispered, voice low. My words felt thin, barely carrying the weight of my fear. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he slid his hand over mine, thumb brushing in slow circles. I closed my eyes at the gentle motion, tears pressing behind them, tears of gratitude that he stood by me and fear that even his touch couldn't erase the threat. The baby monitor crackled faintly from the shelf. I leaned forward, catching the rhythmic hiss of static, as if the house exhaled in its own language. My hand trembled as I reached to mute it. I caught the look in my husband's eyes, worry tempered by resolve, and I blinked away the moisture that gathered at the corners of my vision. Guilt flooded me, guilt for leaning on him so heavily, guilt for letting my son sleep in a house where shadows might still lurk. He stood then, voice so soft it was almost a whisper. "Let's check the perimeter again," he said. Even in the low haze of fatigue, I felt energy flicker. We rose together, shoulders brushing, and moved through the hall like a pair of sentinels. I pressed my palm to each door, feeling the cold metal of the lock and imagining it holding firm against any force. At the windows, I traced the seals with my fingertips, looking for any give that might betray a gap. A few steps later, we paused by the foyer, where the key rack stood empty. My heart lurched, an old habit of mine to imagine her keys jangling as she slipped back in. He met my gaze, and I saw the same longing for finality mirrored there, to lock it all away forever. He slipped an arm around my waist, and I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady drum of his heartbeat. It steadied me, gave me the courage to keep moving forward, even when every instinct screamed to hide. Back in the living room, I sank into the cushions again, letting the weight of my fear settle into something more concrete. I crossed my legs and folded my hands in my lap, imagining them as a barrier around my heart. In that position, I felt every ache in my knees, every tremor in my fingertips, as if my body refused to forget the storm we'd endured. My chest heaved with each breath, gentle, deliberate, like training a wild bird to perch. My husband fetched a soft shawl and draped it around my shoulders. Its warmth spilled through me like a promise, that I didn't have to face the darkness alone. I wrapped the fabric tighter, cocooning myself in the safety he offered, while the lavender sachet tucked into my pocket reminded me of fragile peace. I touched it lightly, inhaling the scent until the memory of her notes receded to a dull ache. We sat there, side by side, letting the hush of the house cradle us. Outside, the wind chimes stilled as the breeze died down, and the world felt poised on a knife edge between fear and calm. I realized then that protecting our family wasn't a battle to be won in a single night. It was a quiet campaign, one of small rituals, steady vigilance, and the unspoken bond between us. My hand found my husband's again, fingers intertwining, and I let the tremor settle like rain on glass. In the stillness, I whispered into his shoulder, "I'll keep fighting." My voice cracked, but I meant every word. I spent the afternoon at the community center, surrounded by parents swapping stories over lukewarm coffee. The chatter felt strangely normal, children scraped knees, toddler tantrums, but each laugh tightened a knot in my chest. I scanned the room, noticing how so many faces were turned toward me, waiting, probably wondering why my smile was too forced, my eyes too alert. I fiddled with my mug, fingers tracing the condensation, and took a shaky sip. A friend leaned in and asked if I'd been sleeping. I forced a laugh, setting the cup down so hard it rattled the table. "Oh, just the usual," I said, voice cracking. My pulse thundered, I felt every heartbeat in my throat. She gave me a sympathetic look, but I could tell she didn't really understand the twitch in my elbow, the way my jaw clenched when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Later, I walked home under a pale sky, the wind tugging at my coat. The street was quiet, too quiet, and my heart felt like it would burst through my ribs. I checked my phone, no alerts, no messages. I slid the screen off and dropped it into my pocket. I needed to feel my son's warmth again, to remind myself why this madness was worth enduring. Inside, the house greeted me with its familiar hush. I paused at the threshold, inhaling the faint scent of lavender sachets we'd placed like talismans. My husband met me in the hallway, shoulders hunched. He gave me a small nod, questioning, concerned, and I squeezed his hand. It felt like gravity, pulling me back from the edge. I carried our son upstairs, his soft giggles a fragile soundtrack to our steps. In the nursery, I set him in his crib and watched him reach for the mobile, white-pink birds spinning overhead. My chest loosened just enough to let a quiet ache slip in. I tucked the blanket around him and whispered, "Mommy's right here," voice thick with relief. After I set him down, I lingered by the door, tracing the floral wallpaper with my fingertip. Memories flooded me, the first night she'd slipped in, humming that lullaby, pressing her hand to the rail. I swallowed, tasting metal, and shivered. My husband appeared behind me, sliding his arms around my waist. I let the tension fold out of my shoulders against him. We spent the next hour reviewing our plan. The police would patrol the block after dark, a neighbor volunteered for late-night checks, and we'd set silent alarms on every window. My hands shook as I clicked through the security app on my phone, each camera angle feeling like a fresh wound. I counted the seconds between frames, eyes darting as if the feed might betray her presence at any moment. Finally, he spoke. "Tomorrow, I'll stay home with him. You need to rest." His voice was gentle, like a whispered promise. I closed my eyes against the swirl of dread. "I can't," I said. "What if she comes when I'm not ready?" His arms tightened as he held me. "We'll face it together. But you need sleep." That night, I lay half awake in the dark, listening to my husband's even breaths. Every creak of the floor felt like bad news. I rolled onto my side and reached for my phone, thumb hovering over the police app's emergency dial. My fingers trembled so badly the icon blurred. I pulled the phone away and pressed it flat against my chest, heart pounding in time with the lines on the ceiling. A whisper of movement from the hallway made me bolt upright. My skin prickled as I pressed my ear to the door. Silence. I exhaled so hard my breath rattled. Then I heard it, a soft tap, like fabric brushing against wood. My pulse hammered and I blinked away blind panic. I reached for the doorknob, fist closing around the cool metal, and in that moment, every fear, every sleepless night, every plan we'd made coalesced into a single point of reckoning. I opened the door and flicked the hall light on. The corridor stretched before me, empty but charged. I stepped into the glow, heart slamming into my ribs. The silent cameras blinked red from their discreet corners, and I felt their gaze like a web. I whispered, "Show yourself," voice cracking but resolute. The silence answered back, thick, mocking. Yet I stood there, trembling but unbowed, knowing that the next move would be mine. Rain tapped insistently against the skylight as I crouched beside the nursery door, listening to every creak of the old floorboards. My jacket smelled faintly of rain and sweat, evidence of the cold whiplash I'd felt moments before when I discovered muddy footprints at the threshold. I pressed my hand against the cool wood, drawing strength from its solidity, and exhaled slowly, tasting iron in my mouth. My pulse throbbed in my temples like a warning bell. Inside, our son lay cocooned in blankets, his chest rising and falling in the dim glow of the nightlight. I hesitated, eyes scanning the hallway behind me where shadows pulsed with potential threat. The hush between my husband and me was heavier than any argument, two warriors united by exhaustion and the unspoken vow to protect our child at all costs. He knelt beside me, fingers brushing the footprints on the floor as though trying to erase her presence. "She was here," he said, voice low and rough. I nodded, swallowing hard against the lump in my throat. My hands shook so violently I could barely hold the door open. "I know," I whispered. I heard her whisper something. He shifted his weight and produced a small recorder from his pocket, pressing play. Her voice floated through the speaker, soft and silken, repeating the words I'd feared since I first found her note: "He belongs with me." My stomach knotted and unraveled all at once. My grip on the doorframe tightened until my knuckles went white. A sudden gust rattled the sill and sent a shiver crawling along my spine. I realized in that moment that our home had become her canvas, and she was painting it with obsession, each muddy print, each clandestine whisper, a stroke of her determination. I felt a flicker of rage ignite behind my ribs, a fire I'd nurtured through sleepless nights and frantic planning. We slipped inside, closing the door so gently I almost doubted it would stay shut. The baby monitor crackled with his faint whimpers, a reminder that innocence existed amidst the chaos. I reached into my pocket and touched the crumpled note she'd slipped under the door earlier, the note I'd kept like a scar, "I'll never let him go." Each word on that paper felt heavier tonight, etched deeper. My husband moved to the window and peered through the blinds at the rainy street below. His breath fogged the glass, and I saw determination flash in his eyes. "We'll end this," he said. "Define boundaries she can't cross." I rested my head against his shoulder and felt the steady beat of his heart, a lullaby stronger than any lullaby she'd sung. We spent a few minutes reviewing our latest defenses: reinforced locks, decoy cameras, legal orders. Each measure felt vital, a shield against her encroaching fixation. My brain buzzed with both relief that we had these precautions and dread that they still might fail. The adrenaline that fueled our vigilance was now a current under my skin, cold and relentless. A soft cry from our son reminded me why I'd chosen this endless watch. I approached the crib and brushed his cheek with trembling fingertips. His lashes fluttered open, and he gazed up at me with unguarded trust. My chest convulsed with emotion so fierce I could barely stand. I carried him to the rocking chair, cradling him close as we swayed in silence. He drifted back to sleep against my chest, and I marveled at the fragile peace in his rhythm. It struck me that every action we took, every trap we laid, was for moments like this, simple, sacred, unbroken by fear. I kissed his forehead, feeling the soft give of his skin under my lips, and whispered, "You're safe." My husband sat beside us, leaning against the wall, and watched. His face had that hard set, the same I saw in the recorder's playback, the words echoing in the hallway. But now he wore a gentle exhaustion, softened by our son's presence. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of my hair behind my ear, the intimacy of the gesture grounding me more than any plan. We remained there, the three of us entwined, while the rain continued its rhythmic percussion above. The storm outside felt distant now, replaced by the steady lull of our breathing. Every creak or whisper in the old house felt smaller, contained within the embrace we shared. That afternoon, the sky was slate gray and low, pressing the weight of rain onto the rooftops as I paced the living room. My hands were clammy, and each breath felt caught in my chest like a trapped bird. I kept glancing toward the hallway, expecting to catch a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, her silhouette slipping through the shadows. My legs ached from standing, knees stiff as if I'd forgotten how to bend them, but I couldn't sit. Not yet. My husband appeared in the doorway, eyes heavy but alert, and he offered me a mug of green tea. Steam spiraled upward, carrying a hint of mint and warmth, and I closed my fingers around the handle even though my palms shook. I brought it to my lips, the liquid soothing my throat, and tried to steady my pulse. The warmth spread through me, a fragile calm I clung to like a lifeline. He sank onto the couch beside me, posture rigid with tension. "She's been quiet," he said, voice low. Relief washed through me, quickly replaced by suspicion. Quiet meant she was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike again. I wrapped a hand around my tea mug, knuckles pale, and nodded. "I feel it," I whispered. "Something's coming." We sat in silence, the only sound the soft hum of the heater and the distant rumble of thunder. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes, reminder that storms could shift without warning. My mind flicked to the traps we'd laid, camera angles, sensors, the trap in the hallway, and a knot tightened in my stomach. Had we done enough? Or was she already inside, slipping past defenses I thought were impenetrable? My husband set his mug down and reached for my hand. His fingers curled around mine, warm reassurance against my trembling. "Let's check the perimeter again," he suggested. His tone was gentle, but I sensed steel beneath it. I nodded, pushing myself up despite the exhaustion that weighed on my bones. Together, we moved through the house with deliberate care, as if each step were a ceremony. We checked every lock, every window latch, every camera lens. My fingertips brushed the cool metal of the deadbolts, and I pressed them home with slow precision, listening for the reassuring click. My muscles tensed each time we passed a blind spot, ready to fill the gap with vigilance. When we reached the back door, I paused to inhale the faint scent of jasmine from the planter outside, the only sweet thing in our besieged world. The flowers had thrived all summer, indifferent to the chaos indoors. I traced their petals with my gaze, letting their serenity seep into me. My husband laced our fingers together at my side, and I squeezed, letting his calm steady me. Later, I found myself drawn to the nursery door again. I stood outside, listening for the soft rhythm of our son's breathing. The hush felt complete, comforting even. I rested a hand on the wood, feeling its smooth surface beneath my palm. "I'm here," I whispered, as much to calm myself as to reassure him. My voice wavered, and I closed my eyes against the rising tide of fear. A small creak behind me made my skin prickle. I spun, heart hammering. My husband stood there, brow furrowed, lips pressed into a line. The hallway light cast their shadows long and stretched, flickering like silent warnings. I swallowed, mouth dry, and realized how alone I'd felt even with him so close. Fear had a way of isolating you, convincing you that no one could truly share the burden. He reached out and slid an arm around my shoulders. His touch was firm, grounding me. "We'll stay together," he said. Every step. His promise felt like armor. I melted into him, letting his heartbeats sync with mine until my pulse slowed, settling into a steadier rhythm. We retreated to the living room, where the dull glow of the security monitor staged its silent watch. I sank onto the couch, and he brushed a loose strand of hair from my forehead. "I'm exhausted," I confessed, voice small. My confession hung between us like a whispered prayer. He nodded, silence folding around us like a blanket. He kissed my temple. "Rest," he murmured. "I'll take the first watch." I closed my eyes, leaning into the promise of sleep, even as every instinct screamed to stay alert. In that tension between fatigue and vigilance, I realized the fight would outlast any single night. But I also knew that with him by my side, I could carry the weight a little longer. In the dim half-light, I drifted towards sleep, each breath a fragile peace offering. Outside, the storm built its thunder, and inside, we braced ourselves together for whatever came next. The high-pitched beep of the dishwasher signaled the end of its cycle, and I stood in the kitchen doorway long enough for the echo to settle like an unwelcome sigh. The tile beneath my feet felt cool, though my skin was damp with sweat, still catching up to the adrenaline surge from the night before. I pressed my palm against the counter's edge, closing my eyes and feeling the grain bite into my skin. My chest fluttered as if startled, and I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My husband's footsteps came down the hall, steady but quiet, and I felt a surge of relief at the sound. He appeared in the archway, rolling up his sleeves, eyes dark with exhaustion and something else, concern edged with guilt. He offered me a small, apologetic smile. "I left the files on the counter," he said softly. "The new restraining order drafts." My throat tightened at the reminder of the legal fortress we were still building around our lives. I nodded, heart pounding in my throat. I stepped forward, tracing the route we'd walked together so many times, through the living room, past the nursery door, toward the home office. Each step felt weighted by memory, her silhouette pressed against those walls, her calm voice echoing in the gloom. I swallowed and raked a hand through my hair, tugging at the strands like a lifeline. In the office, the pile of papers lay neatly stacked, crisp against the wood desk. I reached for them and felt my fingers tremble when I touched the legal seal. My skin prickled, as if the ink itself carried a charge. I flipped through the pages, noting the bold lines where the judge's name would go, where our names would stand guard against her intrusion. My jaw ached from clenching, and I let out a soft hiss of breath through my teeth. My husband slipped in beside me and draped an arm across my shoulders. His presence was an anchor, though my legs felt unsteady. I leaned into him, letting his warmth flood through my spine. "We're doing everything we can," he murmured. His voice was low, intimate, the kind of reassurance that soothed my rattled nerves. Yet beneath it, I sensed an unspoken question: was it enough? I exhaled, tasting metal on my tongue. I keep expecting her to slip past these defenses, I confessed, voice catching. I cringed at the raw edge, like I'd bared too much. But he didn't flinch. He turned me gently, so he could see my face. His gaze was steady, full of a fierce protectiveness that bolstered me. "She won't," he said. "We've covered every angle." I wanted to believe him, but the taste of doubt lingered. My fingers absently traced the edge of the desk where I'd taped her first note months ago. "He needs someone who won't let him go," those words had said. I could still feel the paper's crinkles under my fingernails. I pressed the memory down, shoving the gasp of panic aside. Later, I found myself standing by the nursery door again, drawn like a moth to a flame. Through the crack, I saw our son curled under his blanket, thumb in his mouth, eyelashes dark against his cheek. My heart twisted at the sight, pure, trusting him, unaware of the battles waged just beyond his dreams. My throat went dry, and I leaned closer, until the soft hum of the baby monitor filled my ears. I touched the wood gently, as though I could protect him by sheer will. My husband joined me, sliding his hand into mine. The contact grounded me, reminding me we weren't alone in this. "Let's get him up," he whispered. "Time for lunch." I nodded and opened the door, stepping in. The lemony scent of his baby's shampoo still lingered in the air, a small comfort. I lifted him out of the crib, his limbs heavy with sleep, and felt the familiar ache of love and fear intertwine in my chest. We carried him to the living room, where sunlight sifting through the curtains painted the carpet in golden slats. He yawned and reached for my necklace, fingers brushing against the pendant I'd bought on happier days. I smiled down at him, voice soft as I said, "Hey, buddy. Mama's here." His sleepy smile burst into giggles, and my chest unclenched just a fraction. As he played with his blocks on the rug, my husband and I exchanged a glance that said everything, determination tempered by fatigue. We sat on either side of the rug, forming a silent pact. I picked up one of the blocks, bright red and chipped, and turned it over in my hand. It felt solid, ordinary, and I realized that ordinariness was worth fighting for. When our son toddled over to me with a block held out like a gift, I took it and nodded, whispering, "Thank you." His laughter echoed, a lightness we'd almost forgotten. My husband reached over and squeezed my hand, thumbs brushing in slow circles. The knot of fear in my stomach loosened a bit, replaced by something steadier, fierce resolve. Later, I returned to the office alone and signed the drafts of the restraining order. My handwriting was deliberate, each loop of the pen a declaration. I paused at the final line, breathed in, then wrote my name with a firm flourish. I placed the papers in an envelope labeled "Clerk of Court," feeling their weight in my hands. On my way down the hall, I paused at the spot where the shadow had once moved, where the floorboards had groaned under her steps. I pressed my palm to the wood and whispered, "You won't come through here again." My voice was a vow, and though my limbs trembled, I felt the promise settle in my bones. That evening, as rain began to patter against the windows once more, I realized that vigilance wasn't about fear, it was about love. Each lock, each legal barrier, each tiny ritual of checking cameras or holding my son close was a testament to that. And in that realization, I found a quiet power strong enough to face whatever came next. The kitchen lights cast a warm glow over the chipped red countertop as I leaned against it, stirring honey into my tea. The sweetness curled along my tongue, a small comfort against the ache in my chest. Outside, the rain had eased, leaving beads of water clinging to the window like translucent jewels. I traced one with my fingertip, watching it slip downward, and thought about how time felt both urgent and slow these days. My husband slipped in behind me, dropping his keys into the bowl by the door. He draped a damp jacket over the chair and sighed, the sound low and heavy. "How's the day looking?" he asked, voice gentle. I took a slow sip of tea, feeling the warmth ease the tremor in my hands. "Quiet so far," I said, though my words carried the tension of someone waiting for a trap to spring. I brushed a strand of damp hair behind my ear, jaw tight against the memory of muddy footprints in the hallway. We moved to the living room, where our son piled blocks into a shaky tower by the window. Sunlight filtered through the clouds now, painting his blonde hair gold. He looked up as we entered and flashed us a grin that felt like pure promise. My chest unclenched at the sight, and I scooped him into my arms. He pressed his cheek to mine, and I inhaled the faint scent of baby shampoo mixed with the lingering lavender sachet hidden in his blanket. Once he toddled off toward his toys, my husband and I settled onto the couch. I opened my laptop to review the security alerts, the spreadsheet of timestamps and motion detections filling the screen. My eyes scanned each entry: front hall, no motion; garage, no motion; nursery door, no motion. The repetition felt reassuring, but I could practically hear her slipping through those blank spaces. My fingers hovered over the trackpad, hesitating. He reached out and tapped the edge of my laptop, breaking the loop of my thoughts. "You need a break," he said. "Let's get out of the house for an hour." I blinked, startled by the suggestion. My first instinct was to refuse. What if she struck while we were gone? But his eyes held something I desperately needed: an invitation to breathe. I closed the laptop with a soft click and nodded. We bundled our son into his stroller, fastening the blanket and double-checking the straps. The air outside smelled of damp pavement and fresh grass. A breeze rustled the maple leaves overhead, and I let the motion lull me as we walked down our quiet street. Neighbors waved from their porches, soft hellos that made my heart flutter with both comfort and disbelief. Here, in this peaceful bubble, we were just another family. We turned onto the park path where children chased pigeons and dogs tugged at their leashes. The crackle of gravel under wheels and the distant laughter felt like normal life whispering to us. My shoulders relaxed for the first time in days, and I exhaled without realizing how deeply I'd been holding my breath. My husband reached over and squeezed my hand, a silent acknowledgement that we deserved this moment. After a while, we found a bench beneath an old oak. My son spotted a squirrel and pointed, shrieking with delight as it scampered away. I snapped a photo, the click of my phone camera echoing in the peaceful hush. It felt like capturing hope. My husband tucked his arm around me and dipped his head to kiss my temple. "We're okay," he murmured. I pressed my cheek to his, tasting the faint tang of his cologne mixed with afternoon sun. When we returned home, the quiet felt different, less loaded, more welcoming. I unlocked the front door and half expected a warning sign on the monitor, but all I saw was our living room in its usual, comforting disarray. I carried our son in and set him down in the playpen, watching him delight in his blocks again. My heart swelled as I realized that our fortress of vigilance could also be a fortress of normalcy. That evening, I found myself back in the home office, organizing the file cabinet where our restraining order papers lived. I slid each folder into place, labels facing outward, incident reports, security footage, legal orders. The ritual felt like an act of care, taming chaos into order. My husband leaned in the doorway, watching. I looked up and offered him a tired smile. He returned it, eyes soft with pride. Later, I stood at the nursery door with 2 mugs of warm milk, the scent of vanilla wafting up. Inside, our son's eyelids fluttered as he stirred in his crib. I set 1 mug on the nightstand and scooped him up, humming that familiar lullaby. His small body relaxed against mine, and I felt the tremor in my chest finally ease. My husband appeared at the door, hand on the frame, and I caught his eye, a silent exchange of gratitude passing between us. As we walked away, leaving the door slightly ajar, I realized that our home wasn't just a fortress, it was a sanctuary we rebuilt day by day. Each shared breath, each stolen moment of peace, was another brick in that sanctuary's walls. And while vigilance remained our watchword, hope had found room to grow again. Thunder rumbled in the distance as I stood at the kitchen sink, fingertips gripping the edge until my knuckles whitened. The dishwater suds slipped between my fingers, cold and slick, but I barely noticed the chill. My vision narrowed on the single white plate in the drying rack, the one I'd used every night since the first note appeared. I pressed my palm flat against its cool rim, wanting to ground myself in something solid, something real. A soft ping from my phone jarred me. I wiped my hand on my jeans, water droplets spotting the denim, and picked it up. It was a notification from the neighborhood watch group, suspicious person seen near Elm Street. My chest constricted so sharply I thought I couldn't inhale. My wet hair clung to my neck, and a bead of sweat slid down my temple despite the damp air. I tapped the alert, stomach nodding as I read the brief description: tall, dark coat, loitering near a child's playground. I backed away from the sink, water sloshing over the plate. My legs trembled, and I braced myself against the counter, tasting metal in the back of my throat. My husband rounded the corner, concern flooding his face. "What is it?" he asked, voice hushed but urgent. I showed him the message, thumb hovering over the screen so long I felt my pulse echoing against my wrist. He reached out, fingers brushing my trembling hand. His touch was warm, steady, an anchor in the storm of my mind. "We'll check the cameras," he said. Relief and dread coiled together in my chest. I nodded, wrenching my gaze from the neat rows of dishes. Together, we moved through the hallway, the floor's creak sounding like alarms under our feet. In the living room, the monitors glowed, each screen a window into a different corner of our home. My husband tapped the front entrance feed, empty. Then the driveway, empty. He clicked to the side gate and paused, zooming in until a shadowy figure came into focus slipping behind the fence. My breath hitched, my hand flew to my mouth until I tasted salt on my lips. The figure lingered, head tilting toward the camera as if seeking confirmation. I felt tears press at the corners of my eyes, anger, fear, exhaustion all mingled into a hot ache. My husband's jaw clenched, and he whispered, "That's her." I pressed my fist into my chest, feeling the rapid drum of my heart. My legs buckled, and I sank onto the couch, head spinning. Each breath felt like glass shards in my lungs. He crouched beside me, pulling me into his side. "We'll call the police," he said. The words landed like stones, heavy with finality. My throat went dry, voice stuck somewhere behind the panic. I nodded, eyes fixed on the flickering screen. My husband picked up his phone, his fingers moving with calm precision I envied. While he spoke to dispatch, I stared at the figure. She lifted her hand, fingers brushing the fence, and then she stepped back into shadow. The camera feed blurred as the wind rattled the lens cover. I jerked forward, heart hammering so loud I thought the mic would pick it up. My palms were wet again, dripping onto the couch's fabric. My husband ended the call and squeezed my shoulder. "They're on their way," he said softly. I closed my eyes, pressing my palms into them as if I could block her image from my mind. When I opened them, the figure was gone. The gate swung slowly, silent on its hinges. My breath rattled in my chest as I clawed at the cushion beside me. He lifted my chin with a gentle fingertip. "We're not alone in this," he reminded me. His eyes were dark pools of solidarity. I swallowed past the lump in my throat and nodded. "I'm sorry," I whispered, voice cracking. "I thought we had her cornered." My words were a confession, raw and tremulous. He shook his head. "You did everything you could," he said. He reached over and muted the monitor feed, cutting the image of her out of our reality. The screen went dark, reflecting our tired faces back at us. In that blackout, I felt something shift, a fragile relief where terror had lived. Later, we stood hand in hand at the front gate, the rain beginning in earnest now, a curtain of water blurring the world beyond our yard. We watched the patrol car's headlights sweep over the pavement. My son slept in the house, unaware of the shadows that skulked outside. I pressed my forehead against my husband's arm and inhaled his scent, warm, reassuring. As the police car swung away, lights fading into the stormy night, I realized the battle wasn't over. But in that soaked hush, wrapped in my husband's steady presence, I believed we could face whatever came next, together. The first light of dawn fractured through the blinds, splintering across the hardwood floors as I pressed my palm against the nursery door. My fingertips tingled at the cool paint, a sharp contrast to the ache in my chest. I swallowed, tasting the stale remnants of sleepless nights, and took a slow, deliberate breath. Behind that door, our son slept, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm that felt like victory. I slipped inside, each footstep muted by the soft rug at the crib's edge. The lavender sachet I'd tucked into his blanket released its faint, calming scent, and I inhaled it like medicine. His tiny hand curled around the edge of the rail, and I rested a finger in his palm, marveling at the fragile trust he offered. My heart constricted with love and fear, my fierce protectiveness pulsed through my veins like wildfire. In the hallway, I met my husband's gaze. His eyes were bloodshot but clear, the kind of clarity that comes from fighting for something sacred. He squeezed my hand, and his pulse throbbed under my fingers. We exchanged a silent vow: no matter how many nights she prowled outside our walls, we would shield our son with every ounce of ourselves. Later, we convened around the kitchen island, maps and camera feeds spread out like battle plans. The storm had broken overnight, drenching the world in glossy black puddles, and the windows rattled softly under the residual wind. My hands shook as I traced the perimeter lines, each camera icon, each locked door, each volunteer's shift. I pressed my forehead to the cool granite, trying to still the tremors that radiated through my arms. "We need to rotate the night watches," my husband said, voice low but firm. "No more 24, 36 hours. Relief and guilt tangled in my chest. I knew he was right. Exhaustion had frayed our edges, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw her silhouette slipping through the rain. I bit my lip, remembering the flash of her coat disappearing around the fence. My husband caught my eye. "We're not doing this alone," he reminded me. He tapped the organized roster on the fridge: neighbors, friends from the parenting forum, even the night shift barista who'd offered to keep an eye out after closing. Their names felt like lifelines. I lifted my chin, inhaling sharply as resolve settled in. That afternoon, I stood at the front door greeting the latest volunteer, a college student whose eyes widened at the emotion still lingering on me. I plastered on a grateful smile and handed her the clipboard. My voice wavered, but I managed, "Thank you, truly." As she nodded and took her position by the gate, I realized how much courage it took for others to stand with us. My throat burned with gratitude. Inside, I flinched at each car headlight through the window. The house felt both safe and vulnerable, like a fortress with one loose stone. I paced the living room, hands twisting the sleeve of my shirt into tight knots, imagining every possible path she could take. My skin prickled as though charged by static. My husband appeared at my side, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Come sit," he urged. I sank onto the couch, body trembling as though I'd run a marathon. He sat beside me, and I let my head rest against his shoulder. The tension in my limbs slowly unwound, like a coiled spring releasing its last loop. Our son's laughter drifted down the hall, the sweetest sound I'd heard in weeks. I bolted upright, adrenaline flooding back. "He's up," I said, voice urgent and relieved all at once. I dashed down the hallway, sneakers squeaking against the wood, and threw open his door. He stood clutching his favorite stuffed rabbit, eyes bright as he studied me. I scooped him into my arms, relief hammering in my chest. His giggle vibrated through me, dissolving the last traces of dread. I held him close, feeling his small heartbeats sync with mine. In that embrace, the horrors of the past nights retreated, and I tasted hope for the first time in a long while. That evening, my husband and I stood side by side on the porch, watching the volunteers filter in, warm scarves, raincoats, thermoses of hot chocolate. Their faces were determined, weary, but unwavering. I realized then that our home was no longer just ours, it was a hearth for a community united against fear. As night settled, I placed a final sheath of lavender blossoms by the door frame, a small talisman of peace. My husband locked the deadbolt, the click echoing like a promise. Inside, our son drifted into sleep beneath the soft mobile light. I pressed my cheek to his crib rail and whispered, "You are safe." Walking back to the porch, I felt the rain's echo in the gutters, no longer menacing but comforting, as if it washed away the darkness. My husband wrapped an arm around me as we watched the night watch torch pass from neighbor to neighbor. I rested my head on his shoulder, drawing strength from the warmth between us. In that shared silence, I let go of the tremor in my limbs. The vigilance remained, but the terror softened into steady resolve. We might never fully banish the memory of her intrusion, but together, we had reclaimed this home. And with our son's peaceful sleep as our guiding light, we would face every dawn, ready, unwavering, and bound by love. The sharp tang of cold morning air stung my lungs as I stepped onto the front porch, clutching a travel mug filled with coffee that had gone lukewarm long ago. Frost clung to the edges of the windows, and each breath formed a tiny plume that hovered before dissipating. I leaned against the railing, watching the neighborhood slowly wake, mailboxes rattling in the breeze, a dog barking insistently 3 houses down, and the distant hum of a snowplow carving its path. It felt impossibly ordinary for a world that had trembled under threat. Inside, my husband was packing our son's backpack with extra mittens and a thermos of hot cocoa. Through the partly open door, I saw his profile against the warm kitchen light, focused, calm, determined to turn this day into something normal. Our son toddled around his legs, trying and failing to fasten his own little coat zipper. My chest swelled with both pride and a pinch of sorrow. How few carefree mornings we'd had lately. I stepped back inside and set my mug on the counter, steam coiling upward toward the overhead light. Our son ran to me, cheeks rosy, and I scooped him up into a spin before settling him on the tiled floor. He squealed, clapping his gloved hands, and for a moment, I let the laughter wash through me. It was a fragile shield, but I'd learned to take whatever armor I could find. After breakfast, we bundled into layers, snow pants over jeans, third pair of socks tucked into boots, and trudged down the driveway. Each step crackled under fresh snow. At the corner, the neighborhood watch volunteer waited in a bright safety vest, clipboard in hand. His eyes met mine and offered a thumbs up that felt like an honest promise. I returned it with a tight smile, throat thick with gratitude. Our son waddled toward the school bus, backpack bobbing. The driver waved, and he climbed the steps unassisted this morning. I felt a lump in my throat. He was growing up, venturing into the world beyond our fortress of cameras and volunteers. My husband put a hand on my back as we watched the bus pull away, muffled laughter from children drifting back before the doors hissed shut. We stood on the sidewalk until the bus rounded the bend. I swallowed, tasting copper fear at how quickly she could slip back into our lives. My husband squeezed my hand. "He's safe," he said, though his own voice wavered. I nodded, pressing my palm against the cold metal of the mailbox, an anchor against the maelstrom of my thoughts. Back home, the house felt both empty and watchful. I flicked on the security monitors and scanned each feed: front entrance, side gate, nursery window. All was still. I exhaled a breath I hadn't known I was holding. Then I noticed something. The side gate feed flickered, just one frame. I froze, heart stuttering. I replayed the last 10 seconds. Nothing. I leaned closer, eyes straining. The gate latch looked slightly ajar, as if someone had tested it and then let it swing closed again. My pulse rattled and I nearly dropped my mug. I backed away and called my husband. His calm voice crackled through the speaker, "I'll be right there." I sank onto the couch, knuckles widening around the mug's handle. Every theory we'd laid out, the trap in the hall, the decoy cameras, suddenly felt like flimsy paper shields. Within minutes, he was by my side, and together we reviewed the footage frame by frame. Nothing had set off the motion sensor, no figure had appeared. The glitch must have been momentary, but the image of that latch loomed in my mind like a specter. "She's probing again," he whispered. I nodded, head pounding with adrenaline. That afternoon, I attended a hastily convened neighborhood meeting in the community center's multipurpose room. Chairs faced a whiteboard scrawled with time slots and contact numbers. Around me, parents huddled in small groups, voices low but urgent. One mother pressed her phone to her ear, arranging for a friend to cover her shift at the corner. Another wrote names on colored post-its, mapping out evening patrols. The collective energy was fierce, electrified by shared fear and solidarity. When it was my turn to speak, I cleared my throat. "We need to triple-check the gate latches," I said, voice steadier than I felt. "And rotate someone through the office feed every hour." My suggestions were met with nods and murmurs of agreement. I realized I was no longer just a frightened mother, I'd become part of a network of guardians, each of us weaving a safety net. That night, after our son returned, giggling about a snowball fight on the bus, I tucked him into bed and watched his chest rise and fall. The lavender sachet on his dresser smelled faint but comforting. I pressed a kiss to his forehead. "Sleep tight," I whispered, voice hushed. "I'm always watching." In the living room, my husband and I sat side by side, the security monitors lighting the dark. The side gate feed stayed solid, no flickers, no shadows. We opened window latches, adding secondary locks we'd purchased that morning. My hands moved with deliberate calm, bolstered by purpose. Each bolt slid home with a satisfying click. Finally, we stood in the kitchen, mugs of herbal tea warming our palms. Outside, the wind howled along the eaves, but inside, the house exhaled with us. I met his eyes, seeing both weariness and quiet pride. "We did what we could today," he said softly. I nodded, feeling the weight of every step we'd taken to reclaim our lives. As I climbed into bed, the linen cool against my skin, I realized that fear would never vanish entirely. But tonight, at least, it was tempered by community and by the fierce resolve of two parents determined to protect their child. And as sleep claimed me, I let the mundane sounds of night, the hum of the fridge, the whisper of snow outside, be the lullaby that reminded me, tomorrow, we would do it all again. The bathroom mirror fogged from the hot shower I'd taken to shake off relentless tension. I pressed a towel to my damp hair and inhaled the faint scent of eucalyptus soap lingering in the air. Each breath felt like a small victory against the restless night before, though my limbs still trembled from adrenaline. My fingers traced the cool edge of the porcelain sink, grounding myself in the solidity of each line and curve. I stepped out into the hallway, reaching for the soft throw draped over the banister. My husband was already examining the front entrance camera feed on his tablet, his brow furrowed. He flicked the screen toward me, and I saw the empty pathway framed by wet leaves and scattering light. No sign of movement, not even that familiar flicker where she'd tested our defenses. My heart eased, but the knot in my stomach refused to loosen. I draped the throw around my shoulders and leaned against the wood banister. "Any new alerts?" I asked, voice husky. He shook his head and tapped through recent logs. "Nothing since yesterday," he murmured. I closed my eyes, letting that small relief wash over me, only to be replaced by fresh anxiety. Silent threats felt more insidious than open ones. We descended the stairs together, each step measured, as if the house were a minefield. At the bottom, I paused by the shoe rack, where tiny sneakers sat beside my husband's boots. Our son's shoes were scuffed from yesterday's snow play, imperfection that felt alive with possibility. I picked up one sneaker and cradled it in my hand, its softness stark against the polished wood floor. The weight of our fight for his safety pressed against my ribs. In the living room, volunteers from the neighborhood support group had arranged fresh baskets of supplies, flashlights, snacks, blankets. Their calm chatter filled the room with warmth. I smiled gratefully at each face, even as my chest tightened at the thought that this peace could shatter. My husband joined me, handing me a cup of herbal tea. The citrus scent tickled my senses as I wrapped both hands around the mug. The warmth seeped through me, but I could still taste fear beneath its sweetness. We gathered on the couch, organizing the supplies into backpacks. Each item felt deliberate: an extra battery, a whistle, a small notebook and pen. I traced the pen's smooth barrel, thinking of every note she'd left behind. I tucked it into my own pocket, a talisman against reinvasion. My husband loaded snacks into a side pouch. Our motions were rhythmic, almost meditative, but my hands still shook enough to betray me. A sudden shout from the front yard made me jump. I dashed to the window and saw our son running toward the gate, small legs pumping, laughter echoing. One neighbor waved him back. I exhaled with relief, then scolded inwardly for my forgotten vigil. My husband raced beside me, opening the door as I sprinted outside. I scooped our son into my arms, spinning him until he giggled in my ear. His warmth grounded me, fierce and real. That evening, after dinner's cleanup and bedtime routines, I found myself hovering by the nursery door. I pressed my ear against the frame and heard the soft hum of his favorite lullaby from the monitor. The melody fluttered like a fragile promise in the darkness. I rested my hand on the wood and felt the grooves of his nameplate beneath my palm. My breathing caught as I whispered, "You're my world," voice thick with both love and lingering dread. I retreated to the living room, where my husband unfolded the map of our block across the coffee table. Each street was sketched, every camera angle marked, and post-it notes fluttered at the corners. He pointed to a new spot for a decoy camera we'd purchased. My muscles tensed at the idea of more traps, yet I nodded, trusting his planning. My mind buzzed with a mixture of hope and suspicion. We sat side by side, shoulders touching, as he updated our volunteer roster on his tablet. I sipped my tea, tasting its last bitter notes, and realized we'd come far from those first nights of panic. Still, the quiet house echoed with memory, flickers of shadow, echo of her soft whisper in the hall. My pulse hammered in my throat, a reminder that this vigilance would never fully rest. When I finally climbed into bed, the linen felt familiar, comforting like an old friend. That morning, pale light filtered through the linen curtains, painting soft stripes across the carpet. I pressed my fingertips against the cradle rail, feeling its smooth curve beneath my skin, and listened to our son's even breathing, a slow drumbeat of peace in the dim room. The weight in my chest loosened just enough to let a hopeful flicker bloom. I leaned over and brushed his cheek with the back of my hand, marveling at the rise and fall of his tiny ribs, and whispered, "You're safe." I padded barefoot into the kitchen, the floor cool under my soles, and found my husband at the counter, pouring us mugs of chamomile. His eyes lifted, shadowed with weariness but bright with something steadier now, quiet determination. He handed me my tea with a small smile, and I wrapped my hands around the mug, feeling its warmth seep into my palms. I inhaled the gentle scent of mint and honey, letting it chase away the last tremors of midnight fear. We moved through our morning routine like ritual, locking each door, checking the monitor feeds, scanning the living room for stray shadows. Each click of a deadbolt felt like a stitch in the fabric of safety we'd woven together. I caught myself pausing at the nursery doorway, palm pressed against the frame, as though anchoring my resolve. My husband slipped an arm around my waist, and I let his presence ground me before stepping back into the bright kitchen. Later, I carried a tray of fresh fruit and yogurt into the living room, where volunteers from the neighborhood watch were chatting quietly over blueprints spread on the coffee table. Their steady faces, lined with concern but lit with solidarity, reminded me how far we'd come, from frantic isolation to a community bound by shared vigilance. I set down the tray and felt warmth bloom behind my ribs, a gratitude so fierce it tingled in my fingertips. We spent the afternoon fine-tuning our defenses, adjusting camera angles, rotating duty shifts, mapping new routes for school drop-offs. My husband traced each street with a finger, his brow knit in concentration. I stood beside him, heart pounding in sync with his careful strokes, and offered suggestions where I sensed a blind spot, an overgrown bush, a low fence gap. With each adjustment, I felt the coil of dread unwind a little more, replaced by an assertive calm. As dusk crept in, I found myself drawn once more to the nursery door. I pressed my ear against the wood, catching the faint hum of the monitor's lullaby and the soft whisper of our son's slumber. The lavender sachet on the dresser lent the air a soothing haze, and my hand trembled as I touched the doorframe, the site of so many battles fought in shadow. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, tasting the lavender's gentleness and the determination I'd nurtured. My husband joined me, sliding a hand into mine. His fingers were warm, his grip steady. "He's safe," he murmured. I nodded against his shoulder, letting the truth of those words settle in. The hush of the house cradled us, a lull between storms, and I pressed my cheek to his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath my ear. Later that night, after the last volunteer had gone home and the world beyond our windows fell silent, I found one final surprise: a single white envelope slipped under our front door. My heart stuttered at the sight, an echo of old fears. I scooped it up with trembling fingers and carried it inside, each step a battle between dread and resolve. In the living room's soft lamplight, I tore it open. Inside was a simple card, a watercolor of a sunflower field and 2 words handwritten in familiar looping script: "I'm gone." No flourish, just stark relief and a promise unspoken. My breath caught as tears pricked my eyes, tears of release and lingering caution. I pressed the card to my chest, fingers tracing the watercolor's gentle strokes, and felt the tension in my shoulders ease, but not vanish. My husband slid beside me and saw the card. He didn't ask, he already knew. Instead, he wrapped his arm around my shoulders, pooling my hands in his. We sat in silence, letting the card's quiet declaration settle between us. Outside, the world exhaled in the hush of night, and for once, I believed it wasn't a trap. When I finally climbed the stairs to check on our son, I paused at the nursery door one last time. I pressed my palm against the wood and whispered, "We did it." My voice trembled with emotion, relief, exhaustion, and the fragile spark of triumph. The latch clicked behind me as I entered, and I found him curled against his blanket, innocence glowing in the soft nightlight. I touched his cheek and spoke the promise I'd made long ago, "I'll always protect you." His eyelashes fluttered, and in that moment, fear fell away, leaving only the fierce, unwavering love that had been my true defense all along. As I slipped out of the room, closing the door softly behind me, I carried with me the knowledge that though vigilance would remain, our home, and our hearts, had reclaimed their peace.